Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I am your host, Scott Wurzbacher, and today I am the one experiencing awe, that reverential respect mixed with fear and wonder. I'm still trying to get my head around the story that we're going to hear today and the incredible human being behind it. Can you imagine rowing a boat by yourself across the Atlantic Ocean? That's exactly what today's guest has done. And in this episode, we're going to find out what it takes to become the kind of person capable of this sort of feat. You certainly wouldn't think about someone whose career has been dedicated to risk management and keeping people safe. But that's exactly who we're about to hear from. I have with me Tim Crockett, co-founder of Flying Frog Consultants based out of Atlanta, Georgia. Originally from Hereford, England, Tim has a strong military background that has served him well in designing and providing security and risk management solutions for a wide variety of clients, both in the private and public sectors. This includes providing services in hostile environments in Afghanistan, the Middle East, Central and West Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Amazon jungles, just to name a few. Tim has appeared on major news networks such as CNN, CBC, Fox News, and Al Jazeera America, and has worked with CNN's news team to provide ongoing safety and security advice. As an experienced traveler, he's used his skills and experience to plan and help produce several television productions, including documentaries and reality shows. In a short intro, I cannot begin to scratch the surface of Tim's career, so I'm going to let him help do that for us. I am so excited for this episode. Tim, welcome to the campfire.
Thanks, Scott. Welcome to be here.
Oh my goodness, there's so much to pack in, and I just cannot wait to share this story. Rowing across the Atlantic Ocean. Before we get there, can we just start with just who is Tim Crockett and how in the world you have developed this adventure spirit to go on this epic adventure?
Certainly, this is where my wife calls my background a little bit like Forrest Gump. You get to see the president again. As you can tell, I'm not from around these parts. I'm from the UK originally. Been
Yeah.
here now in Atlanta, Georgia for just over 20 years now, and came here by way of Afghanistan. So I started out in Hereford, grew up fairly regular childhood, but very blessed and privileged that my father owned a coach and travel business. So
Mhm.
I had the travel bug and that sense of adventure from a very early age. I can remember early childhood, like most school vacations, jumping on a coach, helping like load the bags underneath, and then giving out teas and coffees as we headed south across the English Channel and then throughout Europe and as far down as Yugoslavia. So yes, I was very, very kind of privileged to grow up with that sort of access to travel. And then as I transitioned from school and figuring out what I wanted to do when I grew up, and I'm somewhat still trying to figure that out today. But I started off my early career as a design draftsman and an engineer. I always knew I was going to join the military, always felt that I was going to join the military, but in case the military didn't suit me, I wanted a backup plan. And again, it's kind of leads into a little bit more of my character. I always like to have a backup plan.
Yeah.
So I thought engineering, I liked draftsman, I liked kind of the creativity, but the preciseness of being a draftsman. Engineering, again, that served the analytical side of my brain. But after about 2.5 years, I was getting bored. The local area and playing rugby on the weekend was not enough adventure. obviously things were getting more expensive then, and my job was not that well paying. So I decided I thought I'd join the military, and I didn't know quite which branch of the service I wanted to join. And then a friend of mine who was currently serving in the Royal Marines pointed me in that direction, and there was everything from again climbing up mountains and skiing to kind of running around in boats, kind of doing all real cool stuff. But there was this particular skill set an assault engineer, and you get to build stuff and you get to blow stuff up. And I thought that's
Nice.
for me.
Nice.
So took about 13 months to get in, and then as I did, it was like duck to water. It was the right environment for me. I thrived throughout training, thoroughly enjoyed it, where most people don't. Um, Joined 40 Commando. I went straight to Norway, skiing and again living in the mountains for 3 months. Back from that, straight out to a ski instructor's course, and then Gulf War One. So we went off to war as a young, kind of at the time, 18, 19-year-old. Again, more adventure. It's war, yes, but it's adventure when you're that age. And then kind of that's where my career in the military started to, I thought, slow down. And I was looking for that next adventure. And I thought initially I might want to go and become what they call a mountain leader. Um, and my uh, company sergeant major at the time said, "Hey, have you ever thought about the SBS?" And I went, "What's that?" Having grown up in Hereford, and for those viewers or listeners that know much about the UK Special Forces, you have the SAS, which is the Special Air Service, which is famed with the Iranian embassy siege and a number of other things, certainly more modern day. But we have the waterborne side of that, which is the Special Boat Service, born in obviously World War II, famed with raids against beaches and preparing for the landings and canoeing across the channel and that to blow up German warships and all that sort of
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but at the time, I wasn't a particularly strong swimmer. I was comfortable in the water, but I was like, I'm not too sure about that. But my sergeant major sort of said, I think you've got a good aptitude for this. So off I went, passed the initial kind of acquaint, and then I had 3 months to prepare before starting and embarking on what turned out to be a big adventure. Uh, I was the third youngest guy to pass that selection, and then served out the rest of my military career in special forces. So down there on the south coast, and yes, we get to do all that cool stuff like jumping out of planes, running around in boats, and doing all the real sort of cool stuff that you'd expect in the special forces. But that's sort of what set me up for the second half of my career. Um,
Yeah, if I could, can I just pause us for a minute because it's just like I just think about like the things that people are capable of, right? I mean, just even up to this point, I mean, this is just the beginning, and we're gonna continue to tell the rest of this story. But even kind of just leading up to this point, I mean, I got to imagine that this, the sense of adventure, it wasn't just like jumping off of a cliff and all, like you're just, you're a little boy, and then all of a sudden, like you're this epic adventurer and, in the SBS, and, how did that progression sort of happen, and that like love for adventure, and, was there fear? Was there doubt?
yes, anyone that knows me, if you'd speak to them, yes, confidence has not been a big factor consciously in my life. Now, one would say that perhaps I have been adventurous, and I get that spirit from my father. Again, he himself was in the British military, but only for a short period of time, in the kind of Army Logistics Corps, driving trucks. When he left, um, he actually was driving long distance trucks back and forth to the Middle East, and then transitioned from that with his brother and my grandfather into the coach industry, which up until just last year we'd had for almost 80 years. So different cultures, different foods, like different places. Like you get on a bus and you're meeting different people. All of that is for a young 5, 6, 7, 8 year old is kind of adventurous. And then when you
Yeah.
get off the bus at the other end, you're in a whole new country, city, culture. And I think, like I said, back then perhaps I didn't appreciate the opportunity that I had, but it was certainly shaping me from a very early age um, to always try something. I'm always that person that I may go to the same restaurant every week, but I'll try something different on the menu every time. I won't be kind of stuck in that routine. While I like routine, routine has been part of my life from a young kid through the military and to today. It's kind of some would say perhaps organized chaos. I don't like to plan finitely. There's always a little bit of wiggle room there, but like I alluded to earlier, that having that backup plan, having a degree of safety built
Yeah.
in, whether that's
Yeah.
consciously or not, again, it comes from an early age. I think I got that from my father, and running international coach trips, you have to have a certain amount of planning and redundancy kind of built in. Otherwise, you have a lot of paying customers that will get upset if you're stuck at the side of the road and it's middle of the night and you're not getting to your destination to enjoy your vacation.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because in your bio, like it talked about how you had this engineering job and you just kind of you weren't feeling like it was for you. And that's when you decided to go join the military. And so I was going to ask you about that, but in this conversation, it's clear now like the military was always the goal and the engineering job was the backup plan. So
It was, yes.
yeah.
I think from an early age, I would make toy guns out of broom handles and stuff I could find around the yard and tape it together, and there you go. So
Yeah.
all my adventures had that sort of military theme to it. I liked watching old military B movies, and again,
Yeah.
Guns of the Navarone and Great Escape, all those sort of movies growing up.
Hey everyone, it's Scott here. Did you know that the members of my real estate team, W Realty Group, are listening to their own voices that call to adventure by setting big goals? Some of those goals include planning trips to Bali and the Kingdom of Bhutan, buying investment homes, and running the Chicago Marathon. At W Realty Group, we support and encourage these big goals and want to help turn them into reality. We're currently looking to add new members to the team. If you know a great real estate agent in the Charlotte, North Carolina area that would benefit from being part of our team, please send a text, an email, or give me a call. And know that when you support W Realty Group, you're also supporting this podcast. Thanks for listening. Okay, so take us into the next phase of the career where the safety and risk management business began.
So, yeah, so I touched on that I was one of the youngest to pass UKSF selection back in the day, um, and I kind of got to that point where I was again fortunate to progress through my military career pretty quickly. Within SF, at the time it was a very small closed branch of the UK Royal Marines, so promotion is kind of you hit that ceiling. Um, and I had hit that ceiling, like I said, at that 10, 12 year mark. And um, I felt, well, I'm still young enough to have a second career. I've done a lot of cool stuff. I've done everything that I set out to do, even a few things that I thought I wasn't going to do, but did, and then thoroughly enjoyed. And that was kind of being part of the training team, like training new guys coming through. So I thought, well, let me come out. I'll have 12 years, happy memories, and I can then look at that second career. And that was kind of the thought process. So I applied to come out, and then in March 2001, I thought, well, I also knew that I wasn't going to do some jobs that you would typically transition into, as in like close protection and that sort of stuff, which is at the time looking after very wealthy Middle Eastern families, and you're a glorified driver or an assistant, and I knew that wasn't going to tax my brain and that adventurous, inquisitive side of things. So I thought, right, don't make a decision, give myself good 12 months and sample what's out there, make a lot of connections and figure out what I have a good aptitude for and something that I'm going to enjoy. And I came out, did some work with the media. It was short-lived, a couple of weeks, running around in the jungles of the Amazon on a large sailing yacht, which is pretty cool. But then started looking at bigger projects. Like I did a big kind of piracy project off the west coast of Africa, where we laid a cable, fiber optic cable from Cote d'Ivoire all the way down to Gabon, and then that same cable we picked back up in the Nicobar Islands and took that cable all the way down the Malacca Straits into Singapore, which connect kind of the European markets with the Southeast Asian markets, and a lot of data goes through that pipeline. It was fascinating, and there was a lot of moving parts. So from a project base, it was giving me that bit of adventure and danger, but it was also, we had a lot of engineering and maps and satellites and charts and kind of all these different entities that we had to liaise with. So that was kind of where I was gravitating towards. And coming out of that second project, the company I was working for asked if I would take over a demining operation on the Iran-Iraq border for a large seismic company. So I thought, yeah, sign me up. That sounds exactly kind of what I'm after. And then obviously 9/11 happened and the world changed, changed very, very rapidly. And a lot of the projects that I was looking at suddenly got mothballed because of this uncertainty in the world, working either directly for or with American companies. They were unsure because, again, you're in predominantly Muslim countries or cultures. So there was a lot of uncertainty and fear. So now I've got a mortgage to pay for and money's not coming in. I'm thinking, oh, what am I going to do? And I was in London, actually looking after a tennis celebrity at a classic tennis tournament, and a group of people I was with was kind of very plugged in with what was going on in the world. And he reached out and he said, "Hey, you've worked with the media before, haven't you?" And I was like, "Yeah, loved it. It's great. Well, I've got this project in Afghanistan. It's basically looking after a small news team. Would you be interested?" I was like, "Yeah, I always wanted to go to Afghanistan. Obviously, checked a couple of other boxes. Yeah, when do we start?" 10 days later, I'm in Kabul. That news team happened to be CNN. And I was there for just shy of 2 months and was part of the team that was responsible for getting hold of bin Laden's video libraries that kind of came back, and they made a lot of documentaries. Those VHS tapes went on and got passed to departments of the government, and again answered a lot of questions. So it was a fairly big deal. CNN itself went on to win a bunch of awards that I was named and involved with. I got myself my first Peabody Award, along with the Royal Television Society Award and Eagle Award, which is part of the Overseas Press Club of America. So yeah, it was kind of exciting time. Got to meet a whole different level of people within that news world, that's apart from kind of the news gathering element in the field. Now you've got the producers and people that put the shows together, even right up to senior leadership. And I think they took a liking to me. So as they started to look at what they were going to do for the second Gulf War and how they were going to cover the story, they reached out to the company I was working for and said, "Hey, what if we second Tim to come and set up and oversee and kind of manage all of CNN's news safety prior to that thing?" So I found myself back in Atlanta, and what should have been a 3 to 6 month secondment turned into about 2.5 years. I met my wife here, and have been working with not just CNN but most of North America's media for much of that 20 years that I've been here now. And then obviously, as people like leave news and go into production or go into PR or crisis management, I'm a known entity to them. They're a good, strong referral source. And the work started to flow. And I had this knack, and I think it's because of kind of my creative side and analytical side working in unison.
Hmm.
I had a strong aptitude of looking at risk and then figuring out how to manage that risk in order to achieve a certain aim or objective. So from a news perspective, again, news people don't want to be running around um, putting themselves at risk just
Right.
for a story, because like no story is worth their lives.
Of course.
But they still want the story, and the best stories are close to the action, not 50 miles behind the front lines. So a lot of the time I would come in and figure out, okay, what are the editorial points are you after? Okay, how can we do that sort of safely? We'd develop a plan that way. And then I just took that same recipe and applied that to TV and media, whether that's a reality TV unscripted show or whether that's a documentary. Again, you look at those same elements, distill what's really a risk, what's just a threat, and then come up with a plan on how we can achieve their aim safely. And that's kind of what I've done now for close to 20 years since leaving the leaving the military
Yeah.
is looking at a particular problem or challenge, figuring out the real scary risky pieces, and then coming up with a plan to get to the end and figure it out.
Yeah. So where it's essentially taking dangerous situations and creating a sense of safety around them. And this is what you've been doing your entire life. And I think for the listeners, we're going to talk about this race that you did across the Atlantic Ocean in a rowboat, but I think it was so important that kind of lay the context of Tim Crockett leading up to that point, because this isn't something that, you know, it's not like training for a 5K, right? Where you're just gonna, go out and run for a couple of weeks and then hop in a boat and go across the Atlantic Ocean, right?
It's it's a little different, yes.
This is a
Um,
lifetime of training.
yeah, but and that's applied to me. There are many people, and this year's race, there's something like 43 teams that are out there
Yeah.
currently on the Atlantic. They're in probably some have just crossed the halfway mark, some are about 1,000 miles in. Um, and they don't have my background. They have different backgrounds, and you have some that come from very, very ordinary backgrounds. But it shows you what you can do when you set your mind to it and prepare accordingly to do so and do so safely.
Yeah. So Tim, if we can go ahead and pivot to this race. So first of all, how did you get the idea that you're going to row across the Atlantic Ocean?
So again, go back to my military days. I reconnected with someone that I'd served with in 40 Commando, and we were on the core boxing team together. We hadn't probably spoken for, I don't know, close to 20 years, maybe more, just over social media. And one afternoon, we were like getting deep into kind of all the good old days and telling stories and reminiscing.
Mhm.
And it was about 6 weeks after that conversation, I come to find out that he'd taken his own life and had been
Mhm.
suffering pretty badly from post traumatic stress. Um, Certainly, I didn't pick up on it, and while we were on the call together,
Yeah.
a lot of his other friends that we'd served together with also weren't as aware of how much he was suffering. So it was at that point where it was also the 22 suicides a day. There were like the push-up challenge, various other things happening kind of online and around the world,
Yeah.
trying to draw attention to this situation. Um, and I felt like I needed to do something. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wasn't just going to give some money to a charity. I'm not a big fan of some charitable organizations, and that's a whole different story.
Yep.
Running like I said, a 5K, 10K, a marathon wasn't really, I think, impactful enough for me. So again, fast forward perhaps another 6 weeks beyond that point, and I had another guy that I'd served with, and he was part of a team of six rowing from Portugal to Venezuela and trying to go for the world record of um, continent to continent in a rowing boat. And just one afternoon, kind of disappeared down that Google rabbit hole and came across this sport of ocean rowing and the history behind it. And since leaving school, I've become quite an avid reader, and I like to dive deep into subjects, and that's what I did with this ocean rowing. I bought every book that was available on the first crossing by two Norwegians that did from New York to Europe, and everything in between. A famous UK kind of TV personality that did it with an Olympic rower, and how that story was documented. And I felt this is it. This is what I want to do. Initially, again, the cautious, the risk manager inside me kind of pumped the brakes a little bit and said, "Well, perhaps you should do it as part of a team or as a pair." Is kind of where my mind was going. I thought, okay, who would I want to attempt this with? And a couple of names popped up. I reached out to one gentleman here who is an avid kayaker and has 30 years worth of kind of kayaking experience. I thought, okay, that sounds pretty arduous and good preparation for a challenge like this.
Yeah.
So I reached out to him, and he was like, thought about it for all of about 10 seconds and said, "Yeah, no, I'm not doing that." And so again, knowing a little kind of how I like to approach things and deal with things, the decision to go and do it solo was a pretty quick decision. I think once I knew that my top two contenders as teammates were not interested,
Yeah.
then it was going to be a solo effort. And as I only had about 18 months in order to prepare to get to the start line, which sounds like a lot of time, but it isn't. The time was against me, so doing it solo was going to be, I thought was going to be a lot easier than most.
Yeah. So, you talked about preparation. I definitely want to talk about that. Just like for the listeners. So you found this race called the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge. And that
Correct.
is what you participated in. I wonder if can you just kind of give the listener a little bit of background and context on what this race is, the length, how long does it take? What are the boats like?
Mhm. So anyone that wants to dive in deeper after listening to this, obviously there are
Yep.
more than one oceans. There are different routes across the ocean. So this one is a fairly established mid-Atlantic east to west route. So it starts kind of off the coast of North Africa or Southern Europe and comes across utilizing the trade winds
Okay.
to get you to the Caribbean. Um, this race was set up in '97 by a gentleman called Suchet Blythe. And back then it was all the boats were the same. Everyone was a pairs team. And you literally had to build your boat in order to enter the race and do the crossing. That's changed obviously a lot. And it has changed significantly again in the last 4 or 5 years. But it is now sponsored by Talisker Whiskey. Atlantic Campaigns organizes the race and is a very well run and safe um, race. And I think that was important. Obviously, not being a rower, I'm comfortable in that sort of environment. But again, I've got at the time I had two young kids, obviously a wife. There is an element of risk involved,
Yeah.
so you want to minimize that. So entering a race that you know that there is safety officers taking care of you and making sure that you're getting out on the boat well prepared with all the right equipment. So that was kind of the reason why I chose the Talisker. And then the established race or route is from the Canary Islands, which is just off the northwest coast of Africa, and it's from La Gomera, which is the kind of second smallest island, and then 3,000 nautical miles all the way across to Antigua um, in the Caribbean on the sort of Windward Islands um, down there. Um, it's a race that can be entered into as a solo, like I did, and in the year that I did it, there was 5 of us that chose to do it solo, and then everyone else was either a pairs boat, a trio, 4 or 5 person boat. And again, you have mixed teams, you have different styles of boats. So you have like a pure or an open type class, and then you have a race class.
Mhm.
And obviously, they have different properties in terms of what's affected by the wind. So some boats actually are more aerodynamic and they move faster and can get blown faster by the winds, whereas others chose to go kind of the more traditional, pure style of boat, or construction that again offers different properties for different things. So everyone has their sort of subclasses within that race itself.
Yeah. And I think like just for the listeners, I know that this helped me. Like as soon as I Googled the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge, all of a sudden now there's like it just brought context for me because I can actually see what these boats look like. And they, they're pretty cool looking. They look like they're pretty high tech, but I'm curious, like what kind of technology is available on the boat?
So again, coming back to safety. So when you think rowing boat, you're thinking kind of like fixed seats, big
Mhm.
rowing wooden oars, and the original crossing was done in a vessel very much like that, slightly modified, and to make the crossing and get them safely from New York to Europe. Today, a lot of the design specs come from kind of the sailing world, with the types of materials and the kind of the style of the boat. But there's certain properties that have to be built in. So the boat has to be able to self-right. So if it were to get capsized by a wave, it will pop back up. And this is typically done by ballast, and whether that's equipment, water, or um, built into the boat. Obviously, you have a heavy bottom, and then one or two cabins or compartments above the waterline that are sealed and have basically two big bubbles of air. So as the boat rolls over, you have the weight wanting to get to the bottom again, and then these two bubbles that want to get back up on top of the water again. So
Wow.
that's one of the main design features in the boats that you see today. Some are more pointy, some are more torpedo shaped, some look like sailing boats without the mast. And again, there's probably half a dozen or so different boat designers out there for ocean rowing boats. So it's always best to sort of preface that way: ocean rowing boats compared to rowing boats.
Sure.
And then everything else you find on the boat, you would find on any ocean going vessel. Some of the things that are perhaps a little bit more unique, is the water maker, or the desalinating unit that's there, because
Cool. Yeah.
obviously you're traveling very slow.
Mhm.
You can't pack a lot of water or pack any stores into the boat itself. So you have to be able to make your own water from seawater, and that's probably the most important piece of equipment on
Got
the
it.
boat
Yeah.
itself. Those are mainly battery operated, so you need solar cells to get power from the sun, store it in batteries in order to run the water maker, the navigation equipment, the radios, and anything else, the lights, all those sort of safety features that are on board the boat itself. And then you have obviously life jackets, life rafts. You have what we call a sea anchor, which is basically a large parachute. So if the wind is blowing you in the wrong direction, storms are happening, or there's something else that requires you to kind of hold station within the water, you would deploy the sea anchor, because at some point you'll have about 5.5 miles worth of ocean underneath you. And again, you can't store enough um, rope or anchor chain on the boat
Of
itself
course.
to
Yeah.
reach the bottom. So you're not going to be anchoring off or tying off on anything
Yeah.
mid crossing. And then food is pretty much the only other thing that you have on board. You don't need many clothes. You don't need pretty much else, to row an ocean.
And so do you start the race carrying enough, like, do you ever get support from like a main boat in this race, or are you completely self-sustained the whole time?
So that's an important point, actually. So the any ocean crossing, but the Atlantic crossing, or the Talisker race, they coined the phrase that it's the world's toughest challenge. And to put that a little bit into sort of context, the year that I rode, which was 2018, 2019, so I left in December of 2018 and finished obviously February of 2019. That rowing season, and again, you have to avoid
Yeah.
hurricanes and all those sort of things, and the weather has to be set up. Um, so that rowing season, there were the five on the Talisker, and I think six other independent crossings. So there was 11 of us that rowed across the Atlantic that season, and it's obviously 3 or 4 months in duration. That same climbing season on Everest, over 800 people summited Everest. So if you think climbing Mount Everest is a big challenge, then again, there was 11 of us that rowed across the Atlantic solo
Yes.
versus that climbed to the top of Everest. And there are more people that have been to outer space and have rowed across the Atlantic solo.
Wow.
So again, you kind of, it is one of those things that even though it's growing in popularity, it is a challenge. It is a not just a physical challenge, but it's more of a mental challenge in just getting to the start
Yeah.
and then obviously crossing safely. So the requirements of the race, or an independent crossing, yes, you have to be self-sustaining the entire trot. So you're not going to row off to an island and get resupplied. So you have to take everything with you. You can
Mhm.
be making your own water, and yes, it's hot, humid. There's no air conditioning on board, so you're drinking a lot of water or fluids. So that's going to take up a lot of it. As a solo, as part of the race, I have to take 90 days worth of rations based on my calorific burn rate. They have a arbitrary number, which I think is about 67 calories per kilogram of body weight. So for me, that worked out at the time around about 8,600 calories, and I rounded it up to 9,000 calories a day. That has to be on board. Most of it is like expedition rations, so it's freeze dried or dehydrated.
Mhm.
Um, 20% of that has to be meals ready to eat, just in case your water maker breaks, you lose power, and you have to rehydrate the food. So obviously, to save water, you have to have 20% of those calories as just your regular sort of MREs.
Sure.
Um, and then basic safety equipment. All of that has to be on board, like any
Yeah.
other ocean-going vessel. And then that's it. When you start, you're where you go. There's some additional requirements leading up. Like you have to have a minimum of 100 hours on the boat, 24 hours of which have to be rowing at night. I think those numbers have increased now for the race today. You have to have gone through a number of safety courses, so the normal sea survival courses, VHF courses, navigation courses. Again, all the basics that you would expect. You're going to go off the coast of any giant landmass to make sure that you're competent and confident in your abilities when you get out on the water, because once you're on the ride, it's very, very hard to get off the ride.
I think so.
And the further you're away from land, the more difficult that can be. Because now you do have this thing called an EPIRB on board. You pull that, and it sends a satellite signal, distress signal, to some monitoring stations, and then maritime law, anything that's close and can lend assistance is then directed to your location. Now, if you were to do that mid-Atlantic, help could be 2 days away, or it could be 10 days away. It literally depends on the proximity of other ships that happen to be crossing the Atlantic at that time. So yeah, you have to be able to look after yourself for a sustained period of time, not only doing the challenge, but if there was a major emergency.
So Tim, I don't recall if we clarified for users how long you were out there.
So when going into this and sort of planning, I thought there are two strategies that rowers take when partaking in something like the Talisker. Is you're either rowing to compete. I think you want to win your race category or win the whole race, break world records, that sort of stuff. Or you're rowing to complete, and that all you want to do is get from one side to the other side safely. I fell into the category of I wanted to just complete. I had my purpose and mission, and that was to raise awareness for the charities and the cause of veterans' mental health. I wanted to enjoy it, and obviously wanted to get across safely. So that has how I planned my my crossing. Um, and I thought, right, looking and speaking to a lot of other solos in the years prior to mine, I set myself a goal of 50 days. I thought that's achievable. That's kind of average, um, based on all the variables that I could calculate for at the time. In the end, it took me 63 days, 2 hours, and 32 minutes. And a lot of that is down to the weather. I think
Mm.
in the year before my race, we had a lot of strong, sustained winds in the right direction from start to finish, and all the world records were broken. And there's all these stories of folks surfing down 30, 40-foot waves and
Mm.
yeehawing it all the way across. We had the complete opposite. We had three distinct periods during the crossing where there was no weather. Um, and when we talk about all of that equipment and all of that food, close to the start of the race, your boat or my boat weighed almost a ton in weight. So that when you don't have any wind or wave action kind of helping you across, you have to row that weight, and it's like rowing through like molasses. It's slow, it's uncomfortable. You're in 90, 100-degree weather, close to like 100% humidity, like I said, and there's no respite. It's not like, oh, let me just go inside my carrying and turn the air conditioner on. The sun's beating down on you, and you don't have that wind to help you across.
Yeah. Did you have any of those? I just had this visual when you explained about the 40-foot waves. Did you experience that surfing where you're kind of riding down a big wave?
So yeah, we when we started, we had what looked to be real favorable weather. We had strong winds the day before we were due to leave, which actually prevented us from doing our kind of dress rehearsal for the start, because there was a concern that when people left the marina that they wouldn't be able to get back in because the winds were so strong. Um, so when we set out, yeah, the winds were pointed in the right direction. They were strong and creating some good waves with good intervals that, yes, you could surf down the front of some of these waves. And I'd say for the first 24, 48 hours, um, yeah, we had waves of 20, 30 foot that were in the right direction. It was a lot of fun. And I've got video clips and pictures of me literally just sat on my rowing seat surfing down waves while I'm eating my lunch,
Oh my
and
gosh, that's
thinking this is great. Like this is not going to be hard at all.
amazing.
And then yeah, you fast forward a week and it's very very different conditions and a very different experience.
Yeah, I would love to see some of those photos. So, like, for me and for listeners, like 63 days and hours and minutes on top of that. Um, you're by yourself. This boat does not have a motor. You're the motor.
Hmm.
So, how much of that time are you rowing? When do you sleep? And when you're sleeping, how do you maintain course and not get off course?
Yeah, so this is where we get into the real kind of I I I, I think it's the fun part of it all. Um,
If you're part of a team, it doesn't matter if you're a pair or part of a five-person team, typically your routine is 2 hours on, 2 hours off, and that's from start to finish, which in itself can be pretty tough because 2 hours sustained rowing kind of speaks to itself. You're in
Yep.
the sea,
Yep.
you're rowing. Then during your off time, you have to clean yourself, do any maintenance on the boat. You have to eat. You have to make water. You have to do all those sort of other things, and you have to be very efficient with that because it's eating now into your rest time, your sleep time.
Mhm.
So that's on and off, on and off. No, doesn't change regardless of the weather or what's happening in and around the boat. As a solo, you have to be much more tactical in your approach because if you were just to do 2 hours on, 2 hours off, you're going to be wasting some of that better weather because if you're not rowing, there's no power going through the water and you're just sat there, and whatever the wind is doing, it's either going to be working for you or against you, and you're just going to be drifting. So you have to be more tactical in if it's good weather, you want to, I certainly did, want to spend more time rowing
Yeah.
instead of just being sat kind of twiddling your thumbs or resting. So my days would be anywhere between 12 and 15 hours worth of rowing Sometimes that would be 7 hours nonstop,
Wow.
other than to like use the bathroom, eat some food, drink some water, which was all done while sat in the rowing seat. And I would say on average, during the daylight hours, I would try to row for 3 hours and rest an hour. And again, during that resting hour, I was doing maintenance on myself, on the boat, making water, eating, and those sort of things. And my plan was to break the 24-hour period up into 6 4-hour blocks. So every 4 hours I would eat. So I would eat much more frequently than some teams perhaps would. I'd eat smaller meals, so it was easier to digest the food, like finish the whole package of food, which seems fairly simple. But when you're looking at keeping a space that you have to live in for 60 days clean and habitable, what you don't want is half-eaten food spilling over into the cabin or on the deck, and all the sort of things that come from that. So my plan was to have smaller meals so I could wash out. And again, you have to take all of your trash with you. Nothing goes over the thing, and you will get inspected at the start and finish of the boat. So all of this again takes discipline and routine to again make your time on board efficient, and all that sort of does add up and accounts for a lot of hours in the day, just taking care of yourself and everything else, as well as rowing, because you've got to get across in the shortest amount of time you had. So yeah, I think I would on average 3 hours of rowing to an hour's worth of rest during daylight hours, and then at night I would sort of break that up into 2 hours on, 2 hours off. But the 2 hours off, I never really slept more than an hour at a time, because I had some other issues on board with the electronics. And there's a piece of equipment called an AIS, which alerts you of other vessels in the area, and it's an anti-collision system. So that wasn't working, and my fear was that I would be asleep, exhausted at night, and I'd get run over by a big container vessel because I'd slept through the alarm, or the alarm wasn't working. So I was a little bit more paranoid at night, making sure that nothing was creeping up on me. So yeah, and that lack of sleep has a big impact on everything you do.
Yeah, it's wild. And so the other thought for me is, like, when you're not rowing and when you're not focused on the direction that the boat is going, what is the boat doing and how do you stay on course?
So that's where kind of I want to shout out to my land team. I had what they call a weather writer, someone that's I won't say on land, because actually he lives on board a yacht in Greece, and his job was to kind of forecast 3 to 5 days in advance of what the weather was doing, and just like a weather forecaster does here on the TV, kind of is directing me to be in the right spot at the right time to maximize the weather. So because of other complications with my steering system on the boat, I had to have a following sea. So I needed the kind of the wind and the waves to be pushing almost right at kind of the backside of the boat. Anything off to the side would cause me problems. So when I'm not rowing and I'm kind of resting, the hope is that the wind was pushing me west. It may not necessarily be exactly in the direction I want to go, but as long as I was heading west, I was happy, whether it was north, west, southwest, or just west, because it meant that I was getting closer to my destination. And in reality, you don't have to be specific in where you are in a fairly sizable piece of ocean until perhaps the last 1,000 miles, and then you have to sort of start to come down that funnel to make sure that you don't miss Antigua, because it's quite a small island, and
Yeah.
and you don't want to get blown past because you won't be able to row against the weather.
Yeah. I mean, would something like this be possible without, like, GPS type navigational equipment? Could you do this without that sort of equipment?
Yeah, and that's how it was done kind of back in the day.
Yeah.
So two guys that I actually served with, they were part of that very first kind of precursor to the Talisker back in 97. in a wooden boat, like I said, when they paid their race fees, and this pallet of marine ply turned up, and they literally had to assemble it and fix all the equipment together. And yeah, then you had to look at astral navigation using a sextant to take a fix. I think they may have had some very basic tracking device, but they themselves didn't have GPS. So they literally had a sextant, rulers, and a pencil, and marked off on their chart their kind of fixes that they took, hoping that they would be accurate. So yes, it is a lot easier today with GPS trackers and satellite phones and all the other kind of things that we rely on today. But it's doable without it. And I think even with all that stuff, I think it was the year I did, or maybe the following year, there was a French gentleman that actually built essentially just a large barrel and floated across the Atlantic, just by use of the sea currents and the wind. Now he didn't know where he was going to make landfall, but yeah, at some point you will hopefully just get across. But we want to get across in the shortest amount of time and get to the desired destination.
What I'm hearing is you don't want to try to go the other way. This is a one-way trip.
It is, unless you're doing the North Atlantic. And obviously, if you study the sea currents and the prevailing winds, then yes, different times of the year there are, like we were utilizing the trade winds. You've got the jet stream. You've got obviously Pacific currents. If you're doing the Pacific, you've got the Indian Ocean. So that's why you would typically leave the Canary Islands or Europe in mid to late December, because that's when the weather system is starting to set up that creates the trade winds that's going to bring you across. And anyone that comes from a yachting or sailing background, that's typically what they do. They will use that to go across in the early part of the year, and then later on, when you have the kind of weather start to move back the other way in late July, August times, they sail back to Europe.
Got it. Makes sense. So Tim, while you were out there, what were some of the challenges that you experienced?
Well, everybody deals with your body just kind of breaking down, like 12 to 15 hours worth of rowing. You've got the heat and the cold if the weather closes in. Obviously blisters, soreness, your muscle weight sort of wasting away, because you're only using those muscles involved with rowing. So walking, like your calf muscles waste away, your hamstrings waste away, your body's eating itself. You've got equipment failure, again, the weather. You've got a certain amount of vulnerability with other marine animals and wildlife, again, ships and stuff that are floating around. I didn't have that sort of encounter, but many boats do have kind of encounters with aggressive marlins that attack the boat, and they'll have the marlin spike pierce the boat.
Wow.
For me, I fared fairly well. Actually, day 2, I injured my knee. I was getting out or getting into the cabin, and my foot was at a strange angle as I hit at the bottom of a wave, and it kind of tweaked my knee, and I probably tore some ligaments. It kind of did balloon up 2 or 3 times the size. It was painful, but only when you twisted the knee. So the actual rowing didn't interfere with rowing. So even though I had it strapped up and taking some Advil to deal with the swelling, I carried on rowing. So that was kind of day 2, which wasn't a good start. But over the course of about 2 weeks, it settled down and didn't become a problem until later on, which was kind of the second issue that I had to deal with, and that was my auto helm. Now, you asked kind of how the boat stays on course. So yes, using GPS and your desired direction that you want to go in, the little brain of the boat can use what we call an auto helm. So it steers the boat in a certain direction based on your position and your direction. most people will have 2, 3, 4 of these pieces of equipment on board because it's not designed for ocean rowing. It's actual a lightweight yachting piece of equipment that's being kind of re-rolled, and little electric motor, and it can burn out quite regularly. So the idea is that you swap this thing out every 3 to 4 hours to stop it from overheating. Schoolboy error. I knew that this was going to be a risk, and I only took the one, thinking that I could either hand steer or foot steer. And when that started causing me problems, I think day 12, and I could go either north or south, but I couldn't go west because of this equipment kept failing. I resorted to steering with my foot, which you get the steering lines and you sort of tie them off within one of the foot plates. You unhook the foot plate, and then you can twist the foot plate left and right to steer the boat. Well, that only happens on the right leg or the right foot, and that was the knee that I'd injured, and that twisting action was very, very painful. So now I had very limited ability to steer the boat. So what was perhaps less of a concern when we started was now quite a major concern. And this is where I think I alluded to any one thing I'd prepared for, and I thought I was pretty well prepared to deal with any one thing, or maybe two or three things happening at the same time in a sleep-deprived state.
Yeah.
But when you start stacking 4 or 5 of these things on top of each other, it can become quite overwhelming.
Yeah.
And there was 2 or 3 occasions that I suffered in that sense, where the weather was blowing me in the wrong direction. So that tripped out the auto helm and meant that I had to go to foot steering. That was problematic, and I was kind of pirouetting around, getting more and more frustrated and exhausted, sleep deprived, suffering from some food poisoning because of some compromised rations that I'd eaten, and then obviously the heat, humidity, and exhaustion that goes along with it. So yeah, at one point you're like, okay, how am I going to get across this ocean? I was probably about 1,000, 1,200 miles in, so not quite halfway. And yeah, you're by yourself. And that's the other difference between working as a team and being solo, because while you have the flexibility to, if I want to row 7 hours, I'll row 7 hours. If I want to stay in bed an extra hour, I can, without obviously upsetting teammates.
Yeah.
But as a solo, everything comes down to you: the maintenance of the boat, the preparing of food and water, and rowing. So when you're not quite up to it, or it was very, very hard at that point to sort of figure out, am I going to finish this? How can I finish this? Again, mentally, I knew that I wasn't going to give up, but there's also some practical side of this. It's like, well, you've still got to get across the ocean. How are you going to do it? So at those points, I'd have to call back to either my wife, my race kind of manager support, Ali, that I think we touched on prior to the recording, to help kind of vent and complain a little bit, to ease that frustration, but also just hear someone talk through what I can't figure out on board. They may have a perspective that, well, have you tried this? Have you tried that? And we really start to just kind of crowdsource some of the solutions. And sometimes there was no solution. It was literally a case of being able to just step back and reframe the problem. And if I couldn't do that, what's the next best thing? And that was something that I took away from those sort of moments.
It's a really important point. So you had some sort of a satellite phone or something that you were able to use to actually speak. So you did have interaction with other humans as you were out there, even
virtually. Yes.
Yeah.
Again, great preparation for COVID. I was very fortunate in the fact that one of my sponsors was a satellite company, and they gave me an additional satellite phone. You have to have 2 for race safety purposes. but I had an independent satellite phone for that, so I could call my team, my family, and just chat. But I also had what I think is now mandatory for this year's race is a small BGAN satellite transceiver, which meant that if the weather was favorable, I could point this at a satellite and get online. I had a very sanitized, stripped down iPhone, and on good days and within 30 seconds, I could be online on a Wi-Fi, and I would use a messaging service to converse with my weather router and or race control or family, and send pictures back and ask questions and get questions sent to me, which was again very, very useful because I would kind of connect maybe 4 or 5 times a day just to download some information and or upload questions. So I did have some sort of feedback, but I chose not to interact as much as perhaps the ability that I had, because yes, it's great to speak to a loved one and get some words of advice and support, but then when you hang up the phone, it can be very much like that emotional roller coaster. And yes, obviously we rode through the Christmas period, and then my birthday is actually New Year's Day, so you call up people, you get the kind of the interaction and the high spirits, and then as soon as you hang up the phone, that's really when, as a solo, the loneliness would kick in. I'm comfortable with I was always a loner growing up as a kid, but when you're out there, it's surprising how much personal interaction that you don't get. And yes, speaking on the phone is one thing, or sending messages, but actually having a face-to-face conversation with another human being and seeing what's going on in their face, and the little kind of micro expressions and the body language. It's hard when you don't have that.
Well, it's so interesting because, part of this whole thing was your experience with your friend and, PTS and, mental challenges. And here you are outside by yourself in the middle of the ocean, and you're kind of, experiencing some of this stuff firsthand, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Like I said, I've been very fortunate in my time in the service not to have be damaged in that way.
yeah,
But yes, this was why I chose this as a challenge, and why I then chose to do it solo, because it's probably the closest you can get to perhaps someone that is suffering from some sort of mental health issue, and feeling that they don't have anyone that they can reach out to, or that they can kind of ask for help. So yes, it's like not the same, but I felt that it was a true reflection of perhaps what some people may be going through.
What were some of your go-to tools out there to get you through those hard emotional times?
Like calling up again, that support system, whether it was family, friends, and so forth, that is probably the number one go-to. Having that conversation with someone and saying, I'm dealing with this, I need an ear to listen to me vent or express what's going on. I need some interaction. That's obviously probably the best solution. I think everyone says you need to speak up. Outside of that, music, but it kind of funny little twist to that. I downloaded probably 11 hours worth of music, thinking that's a lot of music. And then when you get out there and you realize my crossing took probably close to 1,600 hours, and 11 hours is not a lot of music, and there's a lot of repeat. So I learned some songs really, really well. We joked that there was some of my wife's playlist got onto my phone, and I went from not liking country music to tolerating it and actually liking it. Some audiobooks again, just to but also nothingness. just switching all that off, having no external stimuli or other than the ocean around you. Now I took the picture of every sunrise and sunset. I'm not sure what I'm going to quite do with them just yet, but the seascapes, like the waves, the stars, or the clouds, all of that stuff, it's absolutely stunning. And then when that's all you have in terms of external stimulus, apart from kind of the rowing and what you're doing, which again takes up a lot of time. This is not like some joyride. Yeah, it's breathtaking.
Yeah, I mean, I got to believe that you had many moments of awe out there, just in the silence, and whether it was
Yeah.
at night or during the day, or
Yeah, too many. And then, like I said, there's the interactions. We've touched on it a couple of times. The interactions with wildlife. I didn't really see much the first 2 weeks. It may have been there, and I just missed it. Other than some birds that would come visit every day. My first real encounter was with an 18-foot pilot whale that came up and started to swim with the boat and interacted with the boat for about 45 minutes. And this thing was that close that I could just reach down and touch it.
oh my gosh.
That was just, like you said, awe-inspiring. And then encounters with dolphins. At one point, I think I had about 40 or 50 dolphins all around the boat, again, for close to an hour. And I'd never seen so many dolphins in the wild like that, and to be interacting with the boat, not necessarily with me, because obviously I'm just on the boat, but those were high points, because they always seem to come when you're having a little bit of a bad day or an arduous day, and then all of a sudden dolphins would appear, and everything up until that point just melts away, and you think, oh, this is just fantastic.
Magic. I mean, just magic. Tim, I could talk to you for hours about this. This is amazing. I want to fast forward to when you got to the other side, when you actually got to Antigua, and as part of our preparation, you sent me a video. And it was basically you getting out of the boat for the first time and touching the ground.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So I'll back up 24 hours from that video, because it's important to me. Up until that point, I'd gone through, again, various different stages of the row, and again struggled with that racing and not racing, and kind of all the other bits and pieces. Well, about 1,000 miles to go, about 3 o'clock in the morning, I crossed within half a mile of another boat. I didn't see it. I saw it on the AIS. We spoke to each other on the radio, and this other boat left La Gomera 15 minutes before me, literally 2,000 miles ago. And then for the following 1,000 miles, all the way into Antigua, we were trading places back and forth. They were a pairs boat, and they were also another military team. I knew the one gentleman in. There was a little bit of kind of military service rivalry between his unit and my unit. So we were having some fun with it all the way in. And when you get to within 20 miles of the finish, or 20 miles of Antigua, you have to call into the local search and rescue. And at that point, like I said, it was the middle of the night. We closed in on the final destination at night, so we didn't see the island. It's pitch black. They come up on the radio and call in. So they're, I think, about 3 miles ahead of me. And I thought, I will have a bit of fun. We'll see if we can chase them all the way in. But then the weather and Mother Nature had a different idea. So after the weather, this squall had come over, and I knocked out all my power and pushed me in a different direction, actually threw me to the deck, and kind of got a little bit more bruised. I made the decision, okay, just need to calm down and safely get into the destination here. But as the sun came up, where we were expecting the weather or the wind to be coming in sort of from or out of the northeast, it was coming out of the the southeast, which meant that it was pushing our boats up against Antigua, up against the rocks, up against the cliffs. And where I was too north of where I had to get in and around this rocky headland to the finish line and Nelson's Dockyard, which is this kind of man-made, not man-made, sorry, harbor on the southern side of the island.
Yeah.
With my knee, with the steering problems that I had, I knew that the closing sort of 12 miles were going to be tough, and I was going to fight all the way in. But mentally, I thought this was going to be an easy finish. And I don't know why I thought that. I thought, oh, it's the last day, the last few miles. It would literally be just coasting into Nelson's Dockyard. But the weather had other means. So I fought all the way in. And the video that you speak on where I get quite emotional, you hear a certain rasp in my voice because I'm dehydrated. I fought all the way in. I had to get to a certain point 6 miles from the headline just to get around it. And as we started to close, it's the only time in the entire crossing that I wore a life jacket, because I thought within a mile of the finish, I was going to end up on the rocks because of the way the weather was pushing us in a less than ideal direction. So everybody inside, because it's a natural harbor, it's flat, calm, it's beautiful Caribbean blue skies, and yet for some reason we're taking a long time to get in, and it's because I'm fighting not to end up on the rocks. Anyway, finally got in, crossed that finish line, exhausted, dehydrated, and from the finish line, it's about a half a mile in to where you get off the boats, actually at Nelson's Dockyard. And incredibly, for me, it was incredibly emotional, not for just finishing 3,000 miles worth of rowing and everything that I'd gone through, but because literally 2 hours beforehand, I thought I was going to have to jump off the boat, and it was going to end up on the rocks.
Wow.
And nobody saw that. The only people that kind of witnessed a little bit of the what the sea was doing outside was the search and rescue boat that would come in and guide you through the final half a mile, because of there's this reef that kind of guards the entrance to Nelson's Dockyard, or English Harbour, where the race finish is. So yeah, that was tough, and it made getting off the boat even more kind of exhilarating. And it took probably a good couple of hours for it really to sink in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what did that feel like, getting out, like literally getting out of the boat and onto land?
It was tough because when you cross the finish line and you go through kind of the little video clip that you start to see, they circle the boat and you've got the flares. So that's the actual physical end of the race. And then it's just a nice casual row in where you meet the families and the race officials. Well, you have to row past all these super yachts, and there's a flotilla of small boats, people that have come out to see you. So I've gone from being by myself for 63 days to all of a sudden like hundreds of people there, all screaming and shouting and like hooting the horns and everything else. It can be a little bit overwhelming, and I was kind of shocked to some extent. I wasn't quite prepared for that. But then, stepping off the boat, wobbling around, and then being reunited with obviously my family was it's hard to describe that feeling. It's just tremendous.
Yeah. And, I mentioned before we got started here, like when I watched that video, I think the thing that most struck me was, the resilience, the mental toughness that you have to do something like this, to like row a boat across the Atlantic. I mean, like, to me, you've got to be like Man of Steel. I mean, just bulletproof. I mean, and that's the person that I'm talking to. But yet in that video, when you got out of the boat, you became very emotional. And
yeah. Like I said, you're you're a little bit worn down after 63 days that we've touched on, but it is incredibly emotionally overwhelming because all these people reunited with my family. my parents, and that's why I kind of really got upset, is that my parents wanted to see me off from the start and then see me come in at the finish, but they weren't well enough to sort of travel. So my sister came out. So yeah, I had to give a sort of shout out to my father, where again I feel I got my adventurous spirit from, and he would have loved to have been there with me. So again, I got choked up, kind of chatting about them and giving them that shout out. Yeah, but it takes hours, if not days, to readjust to being back, not just on dry land, but like in and around people and all the sort of things that we take for granted, like in our everyday lives now.
Yeah.
Like on board a small little rowing boat, you don't have that.
Well, I think that the beautiful thing for me was, just this idea that like even Superman has emotion. I think that's an important thing.
It is, and we've got to. I think that's part of the problem. To tie this back to why I did it with the veterans' mental health piece, there's so much stigma around not speaking up, and that you
Yeah.
are this guardian, whether you're regular military or special forces, that you can't show your weaknesses, and you've got to bury those emotions, and that's not healthy, and that's probably what's led to this epidemic of mental health, and again, not just in the military community, but further afield to that. So I think for me that was a little bit of acknowledgement in myself. Sometimes you don't have control of those emotions. I certainly didn't have control of my emotions at stages during the crossing, and yeah, at that moment, that on that video clip, it almost broke through. I managed to regain it a little bit, but yeah, we are human at the end of the day. We're flesh and blood. We're all susceptible to these things, and we've got to embrace it and learn again how to manage that in a positive way, rather than just trying to stuff that down. But yeah, this challenge and any ocean rowing challenge, it's more mental than it is purely physical. Yes, there's some physicality to it. I would say that it's probably 75% mental, and that's in terms of the preparation and then adapting to life on a small boat on a big ocean, and then that loneliness and the isolation and being sort of self-sufficient, and all the anxieties and frustrations that come with that. It much more than, yeah, jumping on a rowing machine and rowing for 15 hours is tough, but do that without that support and that knowing that you can get off the ride. Yeah, it's tough.
That's incredibly powerful. So last thing about that video, that when you finished the race, was I'm so glad when I saw you on camera. So for those of you that aren't listening, in this video, Tim is wearing his shirt that says "Tame the Kraken," and he's wearing it for us today. For those of you that are watching on YouTube, you can see his shirt. But if you're not, "Tame the Kraken." So if you've seen Clash of the Titans, you know about the Kraken. But Tim, tell us the meaning of the shirt for you.
So the Kraken actually can be traced back to a Norse kind of mythical creature, sea creature, obviously, that can drag seafarers and whole ships down to the depths of the ocean. Very seen as a very dark, ominous creature, and that was my analogy for mental health and post-traumatic stress. So the idea of tame the Kraken is taking that and being able to acknowledge it, and then again tame it. Like, so it's not going to kind of grow into something that's debilitating and could lead to harm. So yeah, tame the Kraken was the theme of the whole campaign, in terms of raising awareness and some funds for veterans' mental health.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I think it's important to acknowledge, and I think you said it, but just to kind of repeat, like, we're taming the Kraken. We're not trying to destroy the Kraken. We're taming the Kraken.
Yeah, exactly. And again, some Norse legend says that obviously you cut off a leg of the Kraken and it'll grow back. So there's this being able to renew and regrow. So just because something bad has happened to you, it shouldn't destroy you. It's taking what's happened to me and turning it around. It's what's happened for me, so you can grow and become more resilient and stronger from it.
Yeah, I love that so much. I want one thing I want to just mention here is, I've done some kind of research and study on the concept of flow, like this idea of like getting in the zone and just kind of, really like living in that place of just, really feeling fully alive, fully conscious. And one of the triggers of this idea of flow is something called the challenge skills ratio. And it's this idea of like balancing your skill set with a level of challenge. And this is what I see in this adventure that you've taken. You had this whole lifetime to develop these skills. And so like I think for a lot of people, they look at what you've done and said like, oh my gosh, like I could never do that. And you know what? For a lot of people probably couldn't if you don't have the right level of skills. But like for you, it seems like this was definitely a challenge, but you'd also been preparing for it for your whole life. So you kind of, had figured out a way to sort of match the challenge with your skills versus, and I guess that my point here is that, again, you know, the average person doesn't just like decide one day watching TV that they're just going to jump in this boat and go do this, but you found this way to like match the level of challenge with your skill set. And what I usually finish these podcasts with is what's your advice for people that are looking to maybe level up their challenge or, cross that threshold into adventure. And I bring up the challenge skills ratio because I think that plays a part in this.
Yeah, and I would say that you've got to start and look at yourself. Like, what are you comfortable? I talk a lot about people's risk tolerance. Some people have a greater risk tolerance than others, which will impact on everything they do, from choosing a vacation to the careers that they follow to what they do within those careers. Some people are risk takers and they'll take bigger risks based on, again, their appetite for risk. So I think that's an important starting point. So yeah, if you have never run a marathon in your life or find it difficult to run a small race, going and doing like a race across the Death Valley is probably not a good starting point. I had never rode prior to undertaking this. However, like you spoke to, I was comfortable in the environment. I was used to being on the water, in the water, under the water, cold, wet, miserable, all the sort of factors that can be quite off-putting to some people. I'd already experienced that in various different forms leading up to this. So again, that didn't even register for me when I decided to do this challenge. It was more about like, well, how am I going to get the money and the logistics to actually get to the start line, and having to interact with people and ask for money and ask for help. That was like pretty daunting to me. So yeah, it's finding kind of, that skills perspective. Okay,
Yeah.
this is what I'm comfortable and competent in doing, and then in taking that a little bit further in whatever it is you're good at, whether it's cycling or, like, it didn't necessarily, I use the word good very relatively. Again, from a safety perspective, if you're an average climber, soloing Al Cap is, again, probably not the first step, but building up to that, if that is something that you want to set your sight on, but not be scared of picking a fairly scary, audacious sort of goal. And it may take you 18 months, it may take you 18 years. But if it's something that you feel that you want to do, then it's important that you pursue it.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, thank you for that. So, Tim, your whole life story, this row across the Atlantic, but your entire life story, it's epic. And if they haven't already, Hollywood, they probably already know about you, and they're probably already planning the movie about your life. But what I want to know is, when they do make the movie about your life, who's going to be the actor that's going to play you?
So I thought about this a little while. I would say Jason Statham is
Nice.
probably
Nice.
because we have a similar hairline.
I love it.
He, again, anyone that knows his background, he's a diver, pool, obviously athletic, does his own sort of stunts. So I think that he's molded in the right corner. Or maybe Brad Pitt, but
There you go.
you'd have to shave his head, so I'm not sure that would come across.
I love it. And what's your movie going to be called?
It's everyone says I need to write a book as well, and I've chosen the same title close to it that we've got written down somewhere, which is My Extraordinary Ordinary Life.
Ooh, I like that. My Extraordinary Ordinary Life. Yes.
Because to the external world, like everyone would say, I've had quite an exciting life up to this point. But for me, like I said, it's been work, it's been play, it's been something that I haven't really done out of the ordinary until I rode across the ocean.
That's unbelievable. That's a great title. So, Tim, if people want to find out more about you or the race across the Atlantic, what's the best way for them to do that?
I'd say go to the campaign Instagram, which is at Tame the Kraken. That has highlights and all the images leading up through my training and during the crossing. That probably tells the better story. The website's no longer in use up until this point. But you can also email me, which is tamethekraken@gmail.com. I'm happy to answer any sort of questions, or message me through social media again. And we're on all the other platforms as well, but I'd say Instagram's the easier one to get a hold of us.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Tim. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been incredibly inspiring, such an amazing conversation. And for those listening, I hope you've been inspired today as much as I have. I hope that Tim's story has encouraged you to listen to the voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell or you need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thanks for listening. Tim, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thoroughly enjoyed it.